Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and transparently, I use AI as a thinking partner preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. The question I want to talk about today is, how do I decide whether to bring a new tool into my classroom or my building? And to do this, I want to walk through 4 useful questions that come from Daniel Willingham, the cognitive scientist who wrote Why Don't Students Like School? In the second edition of that book, which came out in 2021, he added a new chapter called How Can I Know Whether New Technology Will Improve Student Learning, which I think is a great question. And he hasn't been silent about AI specifically either. He gave an interview recently to the College Board's podcast, The Education Equation, hosted by College Board President Jeremy Singer. And in that interview, he said that AI is different from prior edtech in an important way. He said, quote, "It's not like smart boards, where it was like, we can either opt in or not. It's like everyone got it. All of us in education are like, hey, I wasn't asked about this, whether this was okay with me, but here we are." I think that framing changes how I understand these 4 questions, because the first one assumes the teacher is the one doing the choosing, and with AI mostly, the choice has already been made. So let's walk through these 4 questions with a little bit of paraphrasing. Question 1, is there a good reason to be an early adopter? Or does it make sense to wait until someone else has tried it out? And I'll note that in a more recent Facebook post, March 9th of this year, Willingham laid it out this way. He says, quote, "I still hear this justification, re AI in classrooms, quote, it's out there and we can't be left behind," end quote. He poses a friendly challenge. Which happens more often? 1, students regretted waiting too long to adopt a technology. 2, schools regretted adopting a technology before they fully understood how to use it, which I think is a great framing. Brings us to question 2. How confident am I that I can guess the impact on my students? Was the published evidence from contexts similar to mine? And is this tool narrow enough? That's a very important word, narrow enough that I can guess like a visualizer, or is it broad like an iPad? When he says visualizer, he means like transparency, like a projector, something that will visualize images for the class. Or is it broad like an iPad where it could be used for almost anything? 3, when new technology replaces old, something sacrificed. Am I clear on what that is and am I comfortable with it? And 4, what is the plan for evaluation? What are we hoping to change? How will we know? By when? And what will we do if it doesn't change? So let's walk through each one of those 4 questions with AI in mind. So question 1, the early adopter question. The published evidence bar, I think, is a bit higher for AI than for prior tools because the products change even while the research is happening. By the time a study comes out on a particular chatbot, the chatbot may be updated 3 times, the underlying model has advanced. It doesn't mean you should wait forever, but it does mean to be honest about whether the evidence you're being shown matches the product you're actually being asked to use. Now, this has always been a question evaluating software as a service that's constantly being updated, but I think it's even more true with AI. Question 2, impact on my students. Willingham's narrow, and that is an important word here, narrow versus broad distinction, I think is really important. A targeted AI tool built for a specific purpose, generating a vocabulary quiz, transcribing student conferences, is easier to evaluate than a general purpose chatbot doing dozens of different things. Now, Ethan Mollick calls this the quote unquote jagged frontier. AI's quality varies widely across different tasks, even inside a single product. Willingham's question helps us slow down a little bit and ask whether we're really evaluating one tool or 30 different tools that are packaged as one. Question 3 is actually the one that I'm most intrigued by. When new technology replaces old, something is sacrificed. And the current AI conversation is almost entirely about what AI is adding, not what is being sacrificed. So Willingham underscores that tension. He says in the same interview with Jeremy Singer, he said that the bias of the mind is to reduce cognitive load and to do things an easier way. And when you think of AI, quote, the way that you learn how to do things does entail cognitive struggle. One of AI's primary value propositions is reducing cognitive load. And if learning requires cognitive struggle, those 2 things are in direct tension. And I think that's a trade-off that this question is asking us to be honest with ourselves about. When Singer asked him what he was most worried about, Willingham answered that the thing he's most worried about is, quote, asking students to go home and write something, which really hit home for me because he says writing, he says, puts helpful cognitive demands on students in a way that other tasks do not. And so, quote, I'm quite worried about that. That feels high stakes for me, the idea that writing at home, which is something that teachers have asked students to do for many years, is the practice that risks being replaced. And we've talked about this on this show before, the idea that one of the responses to the threat of plagiarism and AI offloading is having students do all of their writing in class, have all of the writing done by hand. To be clear, I help run a company called Newsella, and we make AI-supported tools that teachers use. I think they're good tools, but I think Willingham's question 3 deserves an honest answer. So let me try to take a stab at that. Let me talk specifically about writing because Willingham mentions this. The product that we've developed called Newsella Writing, we see supporting teachers in giving timely, specific feedback on student writing to do this at scale instantaneously across large numbers of students. But there is a sacrifice, so let's be clear about that. What is it sacrificing? We think it's sacrificing the teacher's own act of slowly reading a student's draft start to finish and noticing everything that happens during that slow process of reading those drafts. Some of that noticing can be replaced by a tool and some of it can't. I've met teachers and administrators who've decided that the noticing is irreplaceable and they're going to take the time to read everything that a student writes step by step because they can't afford to sacrifice that. I'd argue, from our perspective, the noticing sacrifice is something that can be made selectively. It's not an entire opt-in or opt-out. And at the end of the day, when we're thinking about the practice of writing and the amount of writing that students need to do, the sacrifice is a trade-off that's worth considering and making in a mindful way in order that more students can get more actionable feedback more often, which is going to lead to greater improvement by more students more of the time. Let's turn to question 4, the plan for evaluation. What will we do if it doesn't change? The most district rollouts, especially around AI, I've seen have a plan for success, but they don't have a plan for failure. For example, if writing scores don't move, what then? How have we framed the theory of action, what we expect this tool to do? Will we pull it if it doesn't achieve higher writing scores? Will we try a different one? Will we keep going and wait for more data? Willingham's question is one that I think turns the tech initiative from a purchase into a more proactive mindset of studying the tool. So as a takeaway, in his conversation with Singer, Willingham said that the right question is not whether to use AI. The right question is, quote, what are the possible tasks to which students might put AI and what are the cognitive consequences of them using it for that task? And does it seem like a good idea or a bad idea? And I think that sort of common sense, what do we think? What do we see more often? Does it seem like a good idea? Does it seem like a bad idea? Is a very useful frame. And understanding the consequences, such as the sacrifices he was mentioning earlier, is the right way to approach a decision here so that you're mindful of the trade-offs. You may get this, but you will lose that. What are you getting and what are you losing as a teacher? And what will students benefit from and what will they no longer benefit from? There is a trade-off when we're substituting one practice for another. So 2 questions to end our episode for today. I would love to know your thoughts on this. What's a tool, it could be AI or a different tool, that you brought into your classroom or building, and what did you sacrifice when you brought it in? Did you notice at the time, or was this something that you later realized, perhaps only are now realizing, when we brought this tool in, we were no longer doing something, and we consider that a sacrifice, not just a change in practice, but a sacrifice. And then the second question is, when you look at these 4 questions that we reviewed in this show, which one of these is the hardest for you to answer honestly? Just want to probe on that a little bit because these are not easy questions and they don't often come with easy answers. So I'd love to know your thoughts. Please write in. And as always, thanks for joining and we will see you next time.